and security services, if it's that obvious and that rational?
I think because at the outset, George Bush and Tony Blair were persuaded that the al-Qaeda threat was wholly exceptional, different, and there was a very conscious effort to deny the relevance of any prior experience. But I think, 10 years on, I think now there's a very wide recognition that that was wrong. I think it's also, though, important, if we're looking at the history, just to...
Do you think it is that widely recognised? That because now we've had the invasion in Libya, so just as it seems some of that thinking had been discredited, it certainly hasn't stopped them from continuing in that vein.
Well, I think there are grounds for encouragement. If you look at Dame Eliza Manningham Buller's speech last week, the Reith lecture, you'll see.
She's the former head of
MI5. Yes, you'll see. I think signs that there's a wider recognition.
So what is she saying now, which is different from what she would have said before?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, clearly it's easier for her to speak out now, but I think there's also clear evidence that that the government, particularly during Tony Blair's tenure, was getting good advice, and it was tending to ignore it. So we shouldn't overlook that. But also, coming back to Moazzam's point, I don't think we should also, though, quite underestimate the significance in this country of a small group of individuals that I would put in the sort of al-Qaeda mould, and I described them in the book, in individuals like Abu Qatada, Abu Hamza, Abdullah al-Faisal. These are individuals who I think played a significant and negative role, and I describe in particular how finally at Finsbury Park Mosque, which was very much a hub of all that is negative and all that was supportive of al-Qaeda, it was Muslim communities, and very significantly it was those communities that are most often demonised as being Islamist, as being extremist.
Bob,
let me just finish the point, if I may, because I think it's absolutely vital that individuals who almost on a weekly basis over the last 10 years, I have read them being authoritatively demonised, and I think we really have to recognise that these are some of the best allies that the country has, and some of the most effective members of the community when it comes to tackling what is the central problem, al-Qaeda.
So you've been highlighting how the community itself has actually been directly tackling the extremists as you would put them, and it's not the case that the Muslim community has been silent or needed, or in fact you went as far as to say that the authorities were not helpful at that time, and they should acknowledge the community's actual involvement in that.
One of the biggest problems that we've faced, and this is something I've experienced myself, is being labelled somebody without being able to clear your name. So in the media and everywhere else, people are saying that you're responsible for X, Y, Z. And this is what's been said, for example, about Abu Qatada. He's never been charged with a crime in this country at all. And if anybody knows Abu Qatada, and I have spoken to him many times, he's an Arabic speaker. He's not an English speaker. So how did he influence, for example, the guys from Yorkshire and elsewhere who don't speak Arabic? How did he manage to actually physically influence them? What was the process involved? And all of these statements that people put out without actually knowing the details on the ground, how was he actually involved with al-Qaeda? What's he said about al-Qaeda? What's he said about bin Laden? And is he more of a spiritual supporter of what's happening in Algeria, the Islamic groups in Libya, for example? That's more about what the British... Because I think the British intelligence service completely got it wrong. And that's what we're seeing now clearly in relation to them now once again courting the Islamists in Libya.
Okay, there may be a difference on whether you obviously clearly disagree with perhaps a portrayal. Do you want to quickly come back on that, or because I would like to focus
only
on the UK
just very quickly to say that I think in the book I think the Finsbury Park case is still extremely relevant. We may have had now nearly 6 years of very positive leadership, but I think yes, I think given that the success story at Finsbury Park is still very much in conflict with a government policy which is now actually far more explicit about who is an extremist Muslim. And I emphasise that the most effective community leaders that I ever worked with in this counter-terrorist arena are now, you could say they are officially labelled extremist, and this can't be really can't be allowed to go unchallenged.
And is this something that you found in your research, that following 9/11, the stereotyping has actually led to stereotyping people who shouldn't be labelled in this way?
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, to tie the two sections of the programme together, possibly in one way, is to think about the relationship of, for example, David Cameron's speech on multiculturalism earlier in the year, which of course took place, I think it was on the same day as an EDL march. And of course, David Cameron didn't take the opportunity, as was noted at the time, to distance himself and the vision of society that he was trying to get across from the EDL and what they were doing. I don't for a minute suggest that he agrees with their policies or their outlook or anything like that, but I do think it's significant that in that whole multiculturalism debate, and this is something that we talk about in the book, Muslims are of course held up as an example of the failure of a whole range of activities, policies, call them what you will, suggesting that people live in segregation and they don't integrate and cooperate with one another. The success of the action against the EDL over the weekend, I think, is evident that that is not the case. But for a long time, I mean, in our book we talk about the phases of representation since 9/11. For a long time, Muslims were forced into a reactive mode, really, to say, well, you know, we distance ourselves from these the perpetrators of these crimes, whether or not we have any relationship with them. And I think the media, you know, thinking about the title of the programme, Politics and Media, one of the things we try and look at is the relationship between politics and media in creating a certain image of Muslims, which Muslims then were, and to a certain extent still are, forced to respond to cut yourself in the image that you're required to take on. And I think we're still not really out of the woods with that.
Yeah. I mean, Bob, we started off this section with Moazzam and his personal experience. I mean, you were somebody who worked in the police, in the counter-terrorism unit, and now perhaps you've been allied with the very people who you were supposed to be catching, as it were. Have you found that with your stance, with having this nuanced analysis which says to government you shouldn't be demonising a whole community, you need a change in direction, have you yourself faced some kind of criticism or pressure in your own life?
No, I think there's a very healthy, lively debate. I think there needs to be. I think, you know, as we look ahead to the next 10 years, I think we really can learn from mistakes. I think really we should be able to accept that the kind of treatment that Moazzam's had is unproductive. And again, even on the topic of Abu Qatada, I'm certainly not advocating that what has happened to him, you know, let's call it an absence of natural justice. You know, that is clearly not the way forward. So I think if we do come together, if we learn, and in particular, one of the things that I learned early on was the day-to-day impact on ordinary Muslims. I went to a mosque in East London in 2002. I was asking them questions about Al-Qaeda. They had no idea about Al-Qaeda, certainly a lot less than I did. But what they did know was that their mosque had been firebombed the night before, and they rather sheepishly brought that to my attention halfway through the meeting. And I've never forgotten that since then. Goodness knows, I visited a lot of mosques that have been either firebombed and attacked, and I think that is something we still need to learn from.
Reminder of those initial days straight after 9/11, when the whole community felt under huge threat and pressure, and yet 10 years on, we've got people coming out on the streets, standing side by side with the Muslim community, so that we are one community. Do join us same time next week, and don't forget you can catch any programmes you miss on YouTube.